Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Good, and I am the Chief Education Technology Officer for PBS Western Reserve in Kent, Ohio. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you today talking about as you move from your face-to-face class and move more into an online environment, how you can promote interactivity with your students, as well as increase motivation with your students as they also move from your face-to-face to your online class. So when we talk about interactivity in an online course, if you think about it very simply, in a face-to-face course, it only makes sense, right? It's much easier to ensure instructors and students are in the same room together. They can see each other, right? If a student looks confused, that instructor can ask them a question. If instructors most times will give regular time for students to work amongst themselves in small groups. If they assign group projects, oftentimes those are done in a classroom or somewhere else. Students can interact before and after class, and then that gets them fired up basically to be interactive in their class. Online courses are very different from face-to-face courses in this sense that students must now work harder to actively participate in a course. That whole idea of the convenience of sitting next to someone in class, it doesn't promote that interaction when you're in a face-to-face class. When you're in an online course, you're not sitting next to someone. You're not talking with someone. That instructor cannot see when a student needs prompting to ask a question. So as I say, that interaction by your students, the interaction by the teacher requires intentional action. So keep that in mind as we talk about interactivity. The three main areas of interaction when we start talking about online courses are your student-to-student interaction, your student-instructor interaction, and your student course content interaction. So when we look at an online course and we want to have a high level of student satisfaction and student success, your students, as well as you, need to be engaged to become really more interactive in all three of these aspects. And that's all involved with course interaction. So let's talk a minute about student-to-student interaction. Student-to-student interaction is that communication that occurs, believe it or not, between students. Student-to-student interaction is almost inherent in an on-site course, a face-to-face course. Those students are looking at each other, they're sharing their experience of being in the same classroom, they're there with the same instructor, they're learning the same material, they're in the same classroom. But in an online course, students are basically, they're still sharing that same course content, right? They're sharing the same instructor, they're sharing the same material, but unfortunately, they're probably not doing it all at the same time as the rest of the students, and they're certainly not doing it all in the same place. This whole separation of time and place takes away that, what we call that natural ability to communicate with each other, and it's not an easy task. As I said earlier, students must actively seek out opportunities to interact, and you as an instructor have to actively seek out opportunities to interact with your students. So here are some ways to promote student-to-student interaction as you put together or you start to facilitate your online course. Require participation in weekly discussion questions. And when I say participation, it's not just answering the question, but it's also replying to responses to the question. Make sure you're putting those discussion questions together in a way that are very open-ended and require some thought behind them, right? Avoid those objective questions with yes and no answers, and openly look at ways that will allow your students to interact and then other students to interact with those interactions. Create a students-only zone in your course to allow students a safe place to discuss anything they like, even you as the instructor. So you create that safe area. Setting up the ability for students to enjoy synchronous interaction if they desire. So in other words, talk to your students about whenever they're maybe assigned a group project or if they're working outside of class, make sure that you're taking an opportunity to enjoy that synchronous communication. And that could be through texting, that could be through FaceTime, that could be through Google Meet, that could be through Zoom. All of those types of things will allow those students to have synchronous communications with other students. Require collaborative projects. When you do a collaborative project, this really increases that student interaction, because now all of a sudden your students have to work together for a common goal, a common project. And then create a public question discussion where students can ask each other questions. So keep it in mind, this would be very similar to a student standing up in class and looking around the room and saying, what do you all think about the assignment that we have? Or what do you all think about the current issue that's going on in America right now? And then they solicit, input from the group. It's just like this. It's going to be just like that. Is create a discussion, a public discussion area where students and you can post discussion questions. Second type of interaction is student to instructor interaction. And that occurs when the student is directly communicating to the instructor or vice versa. So for instance, student to instructor interaction can be you reaching out to a student or a student reaching out to you. It can be synchronous, which is in real time, or asynchronous, which means a student's posting a question and you reply to that an hour later. But keep this in mind. Students need feedback from their instructor to be successful. And they also need to feel that their instructor is approachable. So how do you do that in an online world? Well, as an instructor, first of all, make sure you respond to those submitted assignments in a timely manner. It is suggested, and I've always suggested that you try to get all those done within a 24-hour period, 24 hours at the latest, unless you let your students know, hey, I'm going to be out of the office. I may not get back to your with feedback within the timely manner, but I'll make every effort to do that. Make sure that you give detailed feedback of what the students have done correctly, as well as what could be improved upon. Send regular emails to students just to check in, just to give information. What's coming up in the course, some future things to worry about. Send regular emails. And then set up some synchronous office hours to allow your students the opportunity to talk to you one-on-one in real time. This can be done via Google Meet, as I'm producing this video here today. It could be through FaceTime on your phones. It could be through the Zoom internet or video conferencing protocol. All of those are ways that your students can talk to you in real time. And make sure you also realize that not all students are able to join you in these synchronous sessions. So make sure that you give them other opportunities to ask questions asynchronously. And once again, I said it once, I'll say it again. Good rule of thumb is to ensure that you respond to those queries within 24 hours. Instructors should also participate in the class discussion by asking follow-up questions. So as an instructor, if you're assigning questions and you're monitoring those responses to those questions, make sure you also add your 2 cents along the way. It is reported that students experience much more satisfaction with an online course when positive correlation to the instructor and the activities are all correlated. The more the instructor is involved and the more the instructor actively seeks out those student interaction, the more satisfied students are with an online course. The next type of interaction is student to course content interaction. So how are your students connecting with the course? How do they participate in the course itself? Do the students enter the course frequently? Do the students complete all your assignments? Do the students read the text? Do they watch the lectures? Do they join in a class discussion? Do they perform practice problems? And then how can students be encouraged to take a more active role in their course? So some ways to promote that student to course content interaction is to make sure that you're looking at different formats and activities for ways to acquire information. Not all students reply strongly to text-based information. So if the course content is in the form of videos, online experiments, direct screen questions, these more active activities can encourage those students that need this form of learning. Don't crowd everything about your course on page 1, week 1, day 1. This is information overload for students. If you put all the information that they need to know in, like I say, in page 1, week 1, day 1. And this discourages students from exploring the course itself. So Make sure you're spreading out your information. If it's an 8-week course, if it's a 4-week course, spread out what's going on with that course and allow for those, what we call those embedded, those deep menus that are arranged week by week so that students can tackle that core course exploration slowly, 1 week at a time, instead of getting inundated right out of the gate. And remember to keep things easy to use. You know, when students find that just using the course, the actual device that the course is on is difficult, they're less likely to participate. You know, the easier the course is to use, to work through, the more simply information can be found, the more straightforward everything is, the assignments are to complete and submit, then the more likely students will be encouraged to participate at higher levels. So as we talk about interaction, it also works hand in hand with motivation. So how do I maintain student motivation in an online course? How do I keep that student interested and motivated through the total course? If you remember that motivation is basically that desire to learn. And it's important to note that students who lack that motivation will be less able to do the hard work that is part of that overall process, right? It's not all just the easy assignments that are part of that learning process. There's going to be hard work along the way. Yet, unfortunately, until recently, to motivate your students in your typical face-to-face class, you relied on more than a couple things, right? You relied on FaceTime, you formed those connections with your students, you developed a rapport with your students, and then you based that on the experience that they all had together while they were in class. Now that you're in an online class, how do you maintain and actually, in some respects, increase that student motivation? Well, first of all, get to know your students. It's important to get to know your students because just because you may not meet them face to face for a while, this does not mean you don't care about how they're feeling, how they feel about you, how you feel about them, whether your students understand or that they feel that their instructor understands them. So what I suggest to online teachers is right out of the chute, that first week of class of an online course, have your students introduce themselves. Share a picture if they're comfortable with that. Write a little bit about themselves. And one of the most important things that I find when you're dealing with an online course is have your students describe the reasons for taking that course. You know, students really appreciate the opportunity that they're giving them to make themselves known, but you're giving them when you ask them, why are you taking this course? And when they describe their reasons for attending this class, or the reason why they're motivated to take this class, or the reason why they took a class with you, you're able to tap into whatever might be motivating them to learn in your course. And then make careful note of your discoveries throughout the class. You know, if you discover a student's having a hard time, or if you're discovering a student has done something special, make sure you hold on to those so you can address those in future questions by tapping those into those students' interests and inquiries. Of anything I tell folks as they get into online environment is have fun and make it casual. A casual tone is extremely motivating in an online course. You know, and I always tell folks, make sure you figure out what your virtual conversational voice will be. And then because your students want to know that they're actually talking and integrating with a live person, not a robot that's just spitting out questions and answering questions. Encourage those students of yours to use emoticons. Have fun in their replies when they enter the discussion groups to give a good indication of how they're feeling about what they're saying, about what they're posting. You know, write your own lessons in a conversational in a conversational tone. Make sure you're adding humor and you're adding personal connections whenever possible when you're assigning and creating discussion group questions and creating assignments. This really helps your students feel connected to you as a human, and then it retains that relationship that you lose when you don't have a face-to-face class. I've said it earlier and I'll say it again, it's really important that you provide frequent feedback. When you're teaching an online course, it's particularly important to provide students with frequent feedback. And that can be comments on their own posts and assignments. It could be comments on their grades. It could be suggestions for future work. It could be comments about what they've put on in a discussion board. And it can actually be something you can talk about, discussions of the discussions on the discussion board. How's that? The online format itself is very alienating, and students feel at times in an online world that as an instructor, you're very far away from them. If they feel that way, students are less motivated to do their best work, and they could really care less about continuing any sort of productive learning. So when you provide them with feedback, you're letting them know that their hard work's not for naught. It's not going into a vortex. It's not going in an inbox. It's not going in your junk folder. But it is being handled by you, a human being, an actual person, and that's really important when you provide feedback. Individual feedback on student work is a big part of online learning. Students learn at least as much from your comments. So remember that. They learn as much from your comments as they do from the readings and the assignments. And it's also very important on your end to prompt with feedback. You know, if you are to be prompt with your feedback, so make sure you expect what you expect from your students and vice versa. If you expect your students to do their assignments in a timely manner, then make sure you're sending feedback to them in a timely manner. And lastly, help your students connect. One of the biggest, I think, responsibilities as an online instructor, and carrying along with the Mission Impossible theme is, should you choose to accept it, is that you need to facilitate connections between and among your students also. So in a face-to-face class, it's easy, isn't it? You know, students are sitting in class with you, we're talking to each other, we're seeing each other. In an online course, there are students that might go an entire semester without ever meeting their peers in person, ever. So since learning, you know, I truly believe that learning is a social process, and adding a social dimension contributes greatly towards motivation. So think about some of the following strategies to help your students get to know each other during their online course experience. Assign each student a learning partner and ask these partners to communicate at least once a week casually by email, by phone, by FaceTime, by Google Meet, and discuss the week's readings and assignments. When I took an online course many moons ago, I used AOL Instant Messenger to meet with my team. And it was by far, I was very worried about that online experience and the alienating effect of that online experience. But it was through that interaction that I had on a regular basis with my teammates that really helped me get through. Each week, ask your students to contribute to a discussion board and then look at responding to comments from at least 2 other folks in their class. So post in a discussion board, but then take some time to openly discuss what other people are posting. And then when assignments are due, require your students before they submit their assignment is to give them off to a peer and do a peer review and vice versa, and have someone look over that assignment and say, and look for any kind of review, evaluation, revision, any sort of comments before they submit that paper to you. So in closing, I wanted to spend a little time talking about how you can move from your face-to-face class and how you can try your best not to lose that interactivity and how best not to lose that motivation that you have when you get into that online class. If you're taking this class for contact hour credit, your contact hour code is INTE, all capitals. And then to submit your contact code, please go to the URL listed below, and that will take you to a Google form that will allow you to fill in your contact hour code. Once again, my name is Jeff Good. I'm with PBS Western Reserve, and I appreciate your time today talking about increasing your interactivity in your online class. And I hope that you find this information is useful and help increase that interactivity and that motivation in your class. Thanks so much and have a great day.